Why did the most powerful nation on Earth, with unmatched military technology, immense resources, and global influence, lose a war against a far smaller, poorer, and less advanced opponent in Vietnam? The Vietnam War, often called America's longest war before Afghanistan, remains one of the most debated conflicts in U.S. history, and the reasons for America's defeat lie not in a single cause, but in a tangled web of political miscalculations, flawed strategies, public resistance, and the sheer determination of the Vietnamese people. When the U.S. first entered the conflict, it was under the shadow of the Cold War, where Washington viewed the spread of communism as an existential threat, subscribing to the domino theory, which argued that if one Southeast Asian nation fell to communism, others would quickly follow, threatening American interests worldwide. And so, beginning with military advisors in the 1950s and escalating to full combat operations in the 1960s, the U.S. committed itself to propping up South Vietnam against the Communist North, led by Ho Chi Minh and backed by both the Soviet Union and China. However, America misunderstood both the nature of the conflict and the will of its opponent. Because for the Vietnamese, this was not just a Cold War battleground. It was a war of national liberation, the continuation of their struggle for independence. After centuries of foreign domination by the Chinese, the French, and now the Americans, and this fueled an unbreakable resolve that no amount of bombs or firepower could extinguish. Militarily, the U.S. relied heavily on overwhelming force, dropping more bombs on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia than were dropped in all of World War II combined, deploying advanced helicopters, napalm, Agent Orange, and hundreds of thousands of ground troops. Yet the North Vietnamese Army, NVA, and the guerrilla fighters of the Viet Cong used asymmetrical warfare, striking from hidden tunnels, blending in with civilians, and refusing to fight on America's terms. Battles like Ia Drang in 1965 and the Tet Offensive in 1968 revealed the limits of American power. While the U.S. could win tactical victories, it could not break the enemy's will or win the support of the rural population, who often saw the U.S.-backed South Vietnamese government as corrupt and out of touch. The Tet Offensive, in particular, was a turning point. Not because it was a military defeat for the U.S., in fact the Viet Cong suffered devastating losses, but because it shocked the American public, who had been told by their leaders that victory was near, only to see the enemy launch widespread attacks even in supposedly secure areas, including Saigon and the U.S. Embassy itself, shattering trust in government statements. Back home, the Vietnam War became the first television war, with graphic images of burning villages, wounded soldiers, and civilian casualties broadcast nightly into American living rooms, fueling a growing anti-war movement led by students, civil rights activists, and even returning veterans who questioned why they were fighting and dying in a war that seemed increasingly unwinnable. Protests erupted across the country, from college campuses to Washington, D.C., while high-profile incidents like the My Lai massacre in 1968 further turned public opinion against the war, painting America not as liberators, but as aggressors. Politically, U.S. leaders from Presidents Kennedy to Johnson to Nixon failed to develop a clear and consistent strategy. Johnson escalated troop levels without ever fully mobilizing the nation for total war, fearing backlash, while Nixon promised peace with honor, but expanded the conflict into Cambodia and Laos, sparking further controversy. At the same time, the South Vietnamese government under leaders like Ngo Dinh Diem and later Nguyen Van Thieu lacked legitimacy, plagued by corruption and poor governance, leaving many ordinary Vietnamese unwilling to risk their lives defending a regime they didn't believe in. Internationally, the Soviet Union and China ensured that North Vietnam was well supplied with weapons, training, and resources, preventing America from ever achieving total dominance, while the U.S., constrained by fears of triggering a wider war with China or nuclear escalation with the Soviets, could never unleash its full might without risking global catastrophe. By the early 1970s, U.S. morale in Vietnam was crumbling. Drug use, desertion, and fragging, attacks by U.S. soldiers on their own officers, reflected the frustration of troops caught in a seemingly endless war with no clear objective. The policy of Vietnamization, meant to transfer combat responsibilities to South Vietnamese forces, proved ineffective, as ARVN troops often lacked the training, motivation, and leadership to stand alone against the determined North. The final blow came in 1975, when, after U.S. withdrawal under the Paris Peace Accords of 1973, North Vietnamese forces launched a full-scale offensive that quickly overwhelmed the South, leading to the dramatic fall of Saigon on April 30, 1975. With helicopters evacuating desperate Americans and South Vietnamese from the rooftop of the U.S. Embassy, a chaotic, symbolic end to a costly war. In the end, America lost not because of a lack of courage among its soldiers, but because it underestimated its enemy, overestimated its own power, and failed to grasp the political and cultural realities of Vietnam. It fought a conventional war against an unconventional opponent, poured resources into supporting a government that never won the loyalty of its people, and lost the war at home through public disillusionment and political pressure. The Vietnam War left deep scars on both nations. More than 58,000 Americans killed, millions of Vietnamese dead, and a legacy of distrust in U.S. government institutions that lingers to this day. It serves as a powerful lesson that military might alone cannot guarantee victory, especially when fighting a determined opponent rooted in nationalism and local legitimacy. And as we reflect on this chapter of history, it is crucial to ask not only why America lost, but what lessons were truly learned for the future of U.S. foreign policy. If you found this deep dive into the Vietnam War insightful and want to explore more untold stories, myths, and turning points of American history, make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode of History Explained in Detail.